Welcome to Head to Head, a podcast by FS Investments, where we get personal with the people of financial services. I'm Kirsten Pickens.
And I'm Ryan Robertson. We are the co-heads of distribution at FS Investments.
Today, we're excited to welcome Joe Brienza, Managing Director at Clarity Advisors, UBS Private Wealth Management.
From public service to private wealth, Joe Brienza shares his journey to becoming a Forbes and Barron's top-ranked financial advisor. So let's get started. We're excited for you to hear our conversation today. So Joe, thank you so much for being on Head to Head. We couldn't be more thrilled to have you. Let's start, if you don't mind. You've had a really sort of unique career path to financial services. You started in public service, and then ultimately have moved into this business. Can you talk a little bit about, how you got started in public service and then ultimately how you ended up in our business?
Yeah, so I went to school out east. So I went to undergraduate in St. Mary's in Maryland, and then graduate school at Johns Hopkins. And it was very interesting because when I had an internship to work for Mary Matalin at the time. So at the time, I didn't know who she was, and most people wouldn't have known who she was. Now, history has a tendency that Mary is a very interesting lady. So I show up to work for the first day, and it was in probably a 40,000 square foot building. And it was the beginning of the 92 campaign, so this would have been in 90. And there was no staff, and there was no walls. Like, Mary had a card table set up. So I walked in, and she looked at me and goes, "Well, what are you doing here?" In so many colorful languages. And I said, "I understand you need some help." She just looked at me and goes, "So you think you can help me?" I was pretty young. I was like 21 or 22, and I wasn't really sure how to respond to that. So I just sort of smiled. So that sort of led to, I worked for Mary and on the team, and then it sort of evolved into supporting and working for the president. And so this would have been 41. And so that was really basically through the 92 campaign. And it was one of those just fantastic, amazing experiences. And then after the campaign, then I ended up going over with Haley Barbour to the Republican National Committee. So I worked there for probably 5 years. And so that was a really interesting dynamic because you met a lot of interesting people. And that's sort of when I started realizing, like, politics is really interesting and working on Capitol Hill was really fun. But you kept running into a lot of very wealthy people. And they had access to power. And it was like, but if you work for an elected official, the challenge is you're always beholden to who's in power and whether they get elected or not elected. And if you work on Capitol Hill, your pay is pretty minimal, right? It's not, you're going to have a tough time saving for retirement on Capitol Hill. So after spending a little bit of time, it became pretty easy to say, like, you know what, we need to sort of make another decision. So I went to graduate school at Hopkins. Then I worked for a little while for Herman Cain. And so Herman was very interesting. Herman was just a fantastic person, great personality. And he was running the National Restaurant Association, right? And his big claim to fame had become years prior when Bill Clinton was trying to roll out his version of national health care. They're in Omaha, Nebraska, and Herman Cain was the president and CEO of Godfather's Pizza. Herman holds him up and says, "Mr. President, with all due respect, your numbers just don't add up." And it's amazing what little lines do, and it just launched him. And he was definitely not a politician at all. He was a restaurateur. And so eventually Herman ends up running the National Restaurant Association, so I ended up working very close to Herman for years, and Herman was just a very dear friend, very dear person. And ended up working with Dick Marriott for a period of time, and got to a point where I wanted out of politics. I wanted to do something different, and there was an opportunity to work for City Cards and work within the City Cards division. So Dick said, "Yeah, go do it. You'll enjoy it." And so I spent some time working for City Cards, happened to be home in Colorado for a period of time. As all good stories do, it all gets back down to a girl. And so I met a girl in Colorado. and was pretty happy because I was sort of expecting to go to London and open up an operations in London. So that's where I really thought I was going to go. But then you meet a girl, and lo and behold, life really does change quite drastically. Now my wife, she sort of informed me that she had a staffing company, and she was not a shrinking violet. She said, so if you would like anything with me, you will move here. So you can tell who wears the pants in my family, because I then moved to Colorado and worked for Citi for a period of time, and then had an opportunity, get approached that Bernstein, and at the time it was Alliance Bernstein, but Bernstein was opening up an office in Colorado. Reached back out to Dick Marriott and said, hey, what do you think? And at the time, I really had no desire to come into this industry. I really didn't want to be a broker. I actually can't think of anything worse, even being in this industry, than picking someone's stock. I really think it'd be just dreadful. And so I went to Marriott and said to Dick, hey, what do you think? This is an opportunity. And Dick said to me, you need to go look. It's a really good company. Their values are really important, and you would like it there. And that was sort of really important to me. I always felt, contrary to people's politics, back in the early 90s, it was a little bit better. But I felt like I did something, and it was a big difference, right? And so I wanted to come in here and do something where at least at nights I can say, you know what, I'm making a positive impact to someone, not just enriching my W-2. And that was really much more important to me at the beginning, is just to do something that was really important. So that was sort of the transition of how I ended up getting into this business.
What a great story. I bet you have a lot of interesting stories you could tell us about that. I mean, how many times do you get to sit down and talk with someone that might have been on Air Force One, huh?
Spent some time on Air Force One.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I will say, as in your 20s, and time was different, right? 9/11 hadn't happened, so the access to what you had was very different. DC was very different. Cars could still drive in front of the White House. So it was just a very different time, right? And so you don't realize it at the time because you're still kind of young and extremely, young and naive. But being in the White House was just fascinating because I loved history. And the idea that you get to walk through the halls of what took place in DC and who was there and who sat there. And the president just had this amazing reverence for the people who came before him, who served the country. And that was probably the neatest things, right? I was fortunate to spend a lot of private times and had some really just fantastic experiences. But it was one of those things that I look back on it now and said that was one of those experiences where it was a really neat experience for sure.
Well, we're definitely going to want to dive into how that sort of formed maybe some of your processes or the way you do things today. But before we do that, I think one of the things that's so interesting and we found in your bio and just all the things that's out there on social media is the very competitive family that you have. I was going to say it probably stemmed from you, but maybe it's your wife if she wears the pants.
I was going to say she was a runner and always was a runner. So she did the Chicago Marathon, and she is absolutely as competitive. There's no question. We don't play many board games anymore at my house.
Gets too violent.
They just gets really ugly.
I mean, what's it like sitting around the kitchen table? You've got a son, Joey, that's a nationally ranked race car driver. Your daughter is a competitive gymnast, and your other son, Gianni, plays basketball and runs cross country.
Yeah.
So do you guys fight for conversation at the table?
No, so my children are not shy. And so my wife has often said, when they were little, we're like, God, I just can't wait till they start talking. And we often go like, when will they stop?
Yeah.
Right? Because they just keep going. Yeah, it was really fascinating because the competitiveness has sort of always been there. And it's just sort of as a family, sort of how we were wired. When the kids were really young, all three of them go-kart raced. And so they all three traveled, and Joey spent time in Europe. But even with Gabby, whether it was golf, whether it was this, and my kids, to the chagrins of my wife and myself, maybe they're a little bit too competitive because playing golf with them is just a mess, because if it's a bad shot, if it doesn't go well, then it's the worst thing in the world. But even playing fantasy football, so I've never done fantasy football with them, and they all three play. And my daughter's not speaking to me this year because I drafted Patrick Mahomes first, of which I'm still negotiating with her, but she is still.
My co-head here is
I live in Kansas City, so I'm a big Chiefs fan.
That's when my daughter's only wants two things every year. She just wants to go to the Chiefs games, and she just wants Patrick Mahomes in fantasy. The boys And we never used to do fantasy until the boys brought it into the house. And I still don't get this, but the Broncos can be winning or losing, and you will not tell by watching because it's all about their guys and their point. And I said, this is very bizarre to me. Like, can't we be for the team? And no, we can't be for the team. No. So yeah, each of my children are very, very competitive. My daughter is probably the biggest hustler out of the three of them. My daughter, so they go to Holy Family. So if anyone from Holy Family hears this, I apologize, but they had a game that came up, Powder Puff game. So my daughter gets all the jerseys, puts everything together, and then she charges everyone. And she charges everyone, and then she charges her own markup on it. And she
How old is she?
She's at the time she was 15. Now she's 16, and she's like, Dad, this is she's 17.
Great.
She's like, Dad, this is the best thing ever.
That's awesome.
And she would have like gum containers full of cash. I go, what is this? She goes, Dad, this is my side hustle. And so my daughter always has a side hustle, but for her, it's always, and a good friend of ours is an attorney, so she'll play paralegal with him on some afternoons where my two boys are wired slightly different, but I always keep telling my daughter, so when you get older, you have to make sure you take care of your brothers.
Yeah.
Because my oldest son is phenomenally bright,
Yeah.
but my daughter will tell you he has trouble getting out of a room.
Yeah.
And we took him all to Toronto last year, him and his four buddies for Toronto GP. It was the IndyCar GP, so he was racing there. And my daughter goes, Dad, this is not good. They can't. And my son will tell him, Dad, Patrick or Ben, they're probably not so good, but I'm really good with being like street smarts. And my daughter looks at me and goes, no, not at all.
No.
Not at all.
You don't even know.
So the street smarts and sort of the hustle
She's got
is in
that.
100% is in my daughter.
That's awesome.
100%.
How fast do the race cars go that he drives?
Oh, they'll get to 150, 160 miles an hour.
And is that hard to watch?
So, they've been doing it for so long. The hardest part is that when they were all three driving, the baby Gianni was driving, and he was, so in the go-karts, between their legs is the steering column, but it's also the gas tank, and they have no seat belts. So you sort of look like a version of just abusing your kids. Like, so the gas tank's between their legs and there's no seat belts?
Right.
No. So when it was the early days, you would really get really nervous, right? So now, Joey's definitely very talented. I think the thing that is always the most unnerving as a parent is for us, it's just the starts, because the starts can just be calamity, right? So unless you're in the first position and you can get away, then you're great. But this last year was a tough year, right? He went upside down in mid-Ohio, like the car flipped upside down and landed on top of the harness. In an oval at Lucas, he kissed the wall. And so there's definitely times where
You holding your breath.
you go like, is everything okay? And usually most of the times most of the times where we've been there, if we're not at a race, we'll watch it on YouTube, but then the announcer will tell us like, oh no, he's giving us the heads up, Mom and Dad, it's okay.
He's
So,
good.
so they're at least okay with telling, okay, he's okay. And then you talk to him. But that's been probably the biggest thing to get used to but I'll tell you, it's no different than Johnny running track or Gabby in doing gymnastics. Anytime your kids are that piece, the racing is a little bit just because the dangers you're just on that limit, right? And when you're pushing several G's through a corner or several hundred, like 100, 125, 130 miles an hour, and that's the stuff that will wear on you as a little bit as a parent.
So, Joe, you've been an advisor for a long time, and you're on about every, top list in the country. And we just talked about this big competitive streak in your family that your wife and kids have, and you obviously have to a degree. Does your competitive streak make you want to be on those lists, or is that just a byproduct of the work that you do?
Yeah, I will tell you the competitiveness side of this business is much more enjoyable. I would be totally lying to say if the W-2 wasn't nice, because it is nice, but the competitive side is much more enjoyable. And so,
And when you say that, do you like to compete against your colleagues or other advisors in the country, or who are you competing against?
yeah, it's all above.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be very honest, I think the really top advisor, that's just, you want to win. So the best thing about getting a new client is the winning process of it, right? Is going through that process, and that's sort of the adrenaline. If I played sports in college, and so if you're trying to relive that back, and I keep teasing my kids, I should have been like in a boy band, but I can't seem to find anyone else that wants to do it with me, unfortunately. So if you get an adrenaline shot, that's what it is, right? And when you think about the list that comes out, it is sort of a really interesting thing. It's nice to be recognized. It's nice to be especially recognized in the industry, but it's also nice because of the magnitude of what it is, right? And I will tell you from the client's perspective, there's a bit of this sort of this panache to the clients too, where the clients look at it like,
there is. Yeah.
like
Third-party endorsement in so many ways.
my advisor's on this list, my advisor's on this list, right? So
Yeah.
I think all in all, it's a really nice way of sort of the proof statement of all the hard
Great
work.
acknowledgement.
Not only what we're doing, what the team is doing, how we think about our families we work with. And so it's one of those things, right? If it didn't happen, would you keep doing your job? For sure. But it's really nice to be
Really nice to
acknowledged,
have
right?
it,
And
yeah.
and I would say that for anything we all do, it's always nice to be acknowledged and recognized.
It
And
is.
this is something that you get recognized outside of the firm. And when
Yeah.
when you get to stand up against some of the top advisors in the country, that's pretty neat.
One of the reasons that Ryan and I wanted to start this podcast, for many reasons, but for the last 25 years, we've been so inspired by all of these financial advisors that we've been fortunate enough to spend time with that give back and that do so much philanthropic work. You have done so much. Can you share some of the things that you do, and maybe a couple stories that you find impactful?
Yeah, so I will tell you from my perspective and the team's perspective, right? It either comes from what my own personal family, my wife and kids are doing, or what my families we work with do. And so there's definitely a few things that we've been involved in for a long time. Early on, my daughter had markers when she was born for potential of type 1 diabetes. And they really don't know why these genes morph and why one kid can get it and one kid don't. And so we've been very active with the Barbara Davis Center, and the Barbara Davis Center is a fantastic center in Colorado. It's Marvin Davis created it. His daughter had cancer, and so he just said, what, we're just going to put money into doing anything we can to finding a cure. And they just do so much amazing things. So it's where I can bring what we do personally, but then clients also run into this. So several of our clients who've had diabetes and the kids are struggling, or what we're able to do is at least put them in contact with the Barbara Davis Center and then have Barbara Davis Center help them, right? The Colorado Music Festival is one we just have my wife has liked it, right? For years we did Vel, and we did Vel Bravo, and that was, interesting enough, that was a lot easier when the kids were small. As they get older, and now I realize I don't have any of my free time anymore.
Right.
So the Bravo was up in Vel, and it was the music festival up in Vel, which is just an amazing event that they put together in the summer. Boulder does the same thing with Colorado Music Festival. It's just fantastic at what they do. So it's a great thing to be involved. Part of it just goes back to sort of what we believe, and that is when so much has been given, much is expected to give back to help out. I have another client who really loves animals, and this year was one of the first times they did a donation to support the guide dogs of the desert. So it's a facility in Palm Springs where they bring the dogs in, they teach these dogs, they train these dogs. And so then my youngest, so we're in the process of just trying to figure out how to make this, but they need adoption families who can adopt the dogs out for 6 months. And so in my world, it's sort of the perfect way to have a dog, because you get a puppy, you get him for 6 months, and then you give him back. And so my youngest has always wanted his own dog. But in fairness, mom usually always takes care of the dogs. And mom doesn't want another dog. So this is a really fascinating thing because he gets it, right? My youngest has this amazing, beautiful, soft heart. And he's the one that says, well, we can help someone. And every dog that goes through the program is given to someone who can't see, and there is no cost. And they bring him to the desert and they train him. They go through the whole process. So then the goal is to eventually have Johnny then be a foster parent for a dog, because we're working out with the school. So then when he goes to school, the dog goes with him. Like everywhere he goes, the dog goes with him. And so he thinks that's a really cool thing, right? That he can train a dog. And so I think one of the fascinating things you learn from very wealthy families is the act of gifting and charity is a learned behavior. And if you don't learn it, then you're not sure how it plays a role. It's just different. And I can tell from families who grew up with really strong giving that came, and then families who have not, because you're trying to figure out how it looks and how it works. But for kids, if you've been brought up into an environment where gifting was a really big important thing, charity was a big important thing, it doesn't matter the amount, right? It just is important that was a topic, that was an important discussion point at the dinner table, that as a family you did something, right? So a couple of years ago, we took the kids to the Denver Food Bank, and we sorted food and we set it out. But at some point, at least for our kids, it's really important that they understand that there's much more in life than just about what they want or what happens to take place on these silly little phones. And giving back is a really important thing. So for us, if we can teach them, then maybe hopefully as they get older, they'll continue this trend and teach their kids as well.
And time is like one of the most important gift to be able to give with giving.
For sure.
Donate your time.
You said a moment ago that you're a lover of history.
Yes.
When you think about history, what does it tell you about the future of financial services and the future of our business or the business that you're in and dealing with clients? Does history tell us what your business will look like in the next decade or two?
Well, I think if we look at it from a very macro perspective, what will take place is there will obviously continuously be evolution within the financial services, right? The one thing about our industry is innovation and evolution is really interesting. Now you're seeing this conversion between technology and changes on our side, right? And if you think back to, if you go back to the 70s, if people had someone that sat in my shoes, it was a broker, right? And it looked something a little bit more like the Wolf of Wall Street. Someone would call you, I got a hot tip, and the idea of having 401ks, they really weren't in vogue, they weren't in fad. And then if you fast forward, now everyone has a phone. And on that phone, the amount of transactions that can take place and the amount of information that has taken place. And now we're not, this next generation is making their decisions on what they're buying and selling based on what they're seeing online, not because they're reading something in the Financial Times or the Journal. And I think that democratization will continue. I think the other thing that will always continue is there will always be this unfortunate dynamic in our industry where you're always trying to chase what's hot. You're always battling in our industry for sort of the slow and steady wins the race from sort of this go hit it really hard. And the really fascinating thing is we had this COVID dynamic. You had a lot of money coming into it. In the last pandemic, none of us were alive. We read about it, right? And so now you've lived through a pandemic. So you would have never guessed that we shut down the markets. We would have never guessed in 2008 or in 2000 after 9/11 we would have shut down the airspace. So there's going to be dynamics that happen. And the big question will become for anyone going forward is just be mindful of what happened in the past, because there will be themes that will play out, right? It's not going to be perfect, but there's going to be themes that play out. And good quality companies, good management teams, they always win, right? So I think no matter what it is, there's going to be trends that will come, and there's going to be companies that'll be dislocated that we won't see anymore. We don't have a lot of bug and whip makers, and candidly, when we were all kids, IBM was the company, and it's hard to believe IBM is now, right? And that Microsoft was nothing. And in the late 90s, I don't think anyone would believe us, but in late 90s, it was hard to imagine that Apple was going to be a viable going entity.
Yeah.
And then the phone launches. So there's going to be interesting things that'll take place, and it should be interesting.
It's fascinating.
You know, one of the things that stood out for me is the name of your firm, Clarity Advisors. It's so smart. It's one of the best names I've heard, because you're providing clarity on so many levels to your clients. I'm sure there's a lot that went into that name.
So I will tell you, the team is myself, and then John Baumgartner Cordell and Chad Jones. The way we were taught is very similar, right? When we merged together, I had been struggling for a year to try to come up with a name, right? And every name I really fell in love with, it was taken.
Yeah, somebody else.
Yeah.
And we went back and forth between names, and the key was not to name it after ourselves, is to create a name so that we can bring in younger advisors and transition a practice so that we don't have to look like a law firm where you just keep adding names to it. And so it's really fascinating to hear how it impacts the belief to you, because Corey's whole thought process was that.
Well, just hearing you talk, you just think about how well that could weave into every conversation through a client experience, through life, through finances, through the markets.
For sure.
They need clarity. Politics, clearly. They need clarity to help with their financials.
Now, being at UBS is the one thing that sets us apart is our advice, right? Being able to have consistent, clear advice is what families are actually looking for, right? What no one wants to be sort of grabbed from guardrail to guardrail. And I often say the best client for us is someone who listens and takes advice. No one wants to go into surgery and have a consultation with the surgeon, like, okay, so what do you think? Should we start cutting here? Should we do this?
Joe, you've had a fascinating career from the White House to today. And one of the things that Kirsten and I like to do to end all of our podcasts is on Head to Head is we like to ask the same question to everyone. And I'm really interested to know what you would say to this. But the question is if you could give one piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would it be?
Don't show up late to the Oval Office. It tends to be very detrimental to you.
Good one.
You know, the thing that I will always, that is the most important virtue to me, to what I teach my kids is don't underestimate how important it is to have a positive impact on someone's life. And if you do something in your life that has a positive impact on someone else's life, then your life will be very fulfilled, right? And it was really interesting. Dick Merritt years ago had asked me, okay, what goes on your headstone? Wow, Dick, this is kind of a heavy conversation.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. And the conversation sort of went around, and he said, I made a difference. And that's what he thought. And this was a conversation that took place over 20 years ago. And it is one of those conversations still today that I think about. Because to me, more than anything else, right? More than write it out, stay invested, it is make a difference. You know, put who you're working for, put what you're doing in front of you. And what I have found is putting the families that we're fortunate enough to work with in front of us, things just sort of take care of themselves. But to my 20-year-old self back then, because whether it was in politics, whether I was working for Citigroup, whether it is now working for UBS, I would tell you the commonality, and I've had different jobs along the way, is for me, the commonality for me is I did something that I felt I had a positive impact. I made a difference in what I was doing. And to me, that was really important, right?
Yeah.
That's probably the message I would leave for myself.
That's great. That's why you prioritize relationships. So
Relationships
much.
are important. They're very important. It's our families, right? So we work with about 30 families. And the most important, I had my team, Jesse and Peyton, out in Utah last week. And we spent several days out in Utah. And it was a really interesting period, right? Because we had deaths. We've had an attorney who was very close to us pass away. And then you have estate planning you need to do. And after doing it, I said, this is really what our job's about. Much more listening to what they want to do and then figuring out how we accomplish it. And in all the years of doing that, I've never had a client ask me about convexity.
Because they trust you.
Right. But what I have had clients ask is, I've been diagnosed with cancer. I'm worried about my wife. Can you fly out? Can you at least tell them they're taken care of? Right. We had a gentleman who was really close to my family personally and to our team pass away. And I know what our job is. And our job is not just to manage the assets, right? Our job is to take care of his wife. And that's why, for me, that's why I like this job so much, right? Like I said, we're all very fortunate. It's a great industry to work in. It's an amazing industry to work in because we get to have such positive impact on people's lives.
Different.
You do.
Absolutely.
100%.
Joe, thanks for
Thank you
being on
so
Head to
much.
Head.
Thank you both for having me.
Great having
Appreciate
a conversation with you. Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
To get the latest episodes as soon as they're available, be sure to subscribe to the Fireside Podcast.
For more on this episode, visit www.fsinvestments.com/head-to-head. This episode was edited and engineered by Aaron Sherman. Video was produced by Melissa Venditti and copy provided by Harrison Beck. Special thanks to show coordinators Laura Coleman and Ellie Zhang. Thanks for listening.